YouTube, this is Steve from Average Joe's Fantasy Football. We've got another mock draft video to help you guys out. Now, we are in a 12-team full PPR league. This is the 5th spot. If you guys haven't already, check out our other content we've got going on for mock draft videos. Again, to help you guys out with your draft season. Most of you guys are drafting now, drafting this weekend, right before the NFL season starts. So let's jump right into it. So as you can see here, I'm in the 5th spot of this 12-team league. Now in the 5th spot, you will typically grab probably a premier wide receiver here, and then maybe a running back in the second round. I am typically a fan of the hero running back strategy. Now, I have done some drafts where I've gone the zero running back route, where I'm going wide receiver heavy in the first few rounds, even a tight end before I grab my first running back. Everyone has different strategies. Some work really well, some do not. But I will tell you, 1 through 3, as far as the rounds go, those are the picks that you have to be, I would say, as safe as you can. Get the best floor with a little bit of upside if possible, because those first 3 rounds could make or break your season. And of course, working through waiver wires all season will be a big factor. So let's see how this mock draft goes. Now, typically these mock drafts, you're going to see sometimes the computer does some crazy stuff. You might even have league mates that do some crazy stuff and questionable things. But in this one, I actually don't mind the start. Ja'Marr Chase is a little bit early, but Ja'Marr Chase did kind of break his hold in. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb signed. So there's some great news there in the fantasy world. So a lot of these players aren't too shocking. Now in the 5th spot, like I mentioned, I try to grab a top tier receiver if I can, or even a running back. In this case, I'm actually going to go running back again. Look, I like the hero running back strategy. Grabbing Bijan Robinson here is not a bad play. You could also grab Breece Hall, who went right after my selection, because sometimes, I hate to say it, the old adage of grabbing a running back in the first couple rounds is very important when it comes to fantasy. There are only so many RB1s in fantasy, especially now with the NFL using the running back by committee or using running backs as specialists. It's tough to have that guy who's going to be that bell cow for your team. So Bijan Robinson is going to be my first selection. Now, coming back into this, you see kind of a mixture. You see running backs and wide receivers kind of going back and forth. Again, nothing wrong with that. I do want to have a premier wide receiver if I possibly can. But in this case, I don't know if Puka Nacua is that guy. I love Puka. I think he's being drafted just a bit too high. In this case, I'm actually going to end up looking at possibly another running back. I'm not going to go tight end because this is not a tight end premium. Grabbing a player like Travis Kelce or even Sam Laporta is just a little bit too early. I'm going to go with the upside in De'Von Achane. De'Von Achane is going to be probably the most weird fantasy player. What I mean by that is I like Achane. I do think he's being drafted a little bit high. Even in this, I'm not crazy about him in the second round. I'd rather grab him a little bit later. But it's hard to kind of deny his upside. He's got that really big boom capability, but there could be a bust in this season. What I mean by that is there might be a chance that he doesn't have the games that we're hoping for because maybe Miami does use Jalen Wright. Maybe Miami does use Mostert. And maybe Achane just doesn't get enough touches to have the opportunities. We'll see how this plays out. But Achane here on that one. Now I've got to grab a wide receiver here because I do need to get that position filled. Looking at wide receiver options, I got Nico, Mike Evans, Debo. I'm actually going to go Nico Collins here because I think Nico Collins is the wide receiver 1 on the Houston Texans. I like Tank Dell as well. I do see Stephon Diggs here. I don't know. I love Stephon Diggs. I think he's a premier wide receiver. I don't know if he's gotten enough off-season work to kind of build that up with CJ Stroud. We'll see how it plays out. Nico Collins did get that big extension for the Houston Texans, which means Houston truly believes in him, and I think Stroud also believes in him. So, quarterbacks obviously going off the board. I do think Stroud is a little early. I don't think Stroud should be drafted in the 4th round. I do think he should be drafted, don't get me wrong. I think more in the 7th or 8th round. I think he's a little too high in these. I get he had an amazing season, but he doesn't have the rushing upside to really fulfill and kind of make that 4th round pick a smart pick. I would rather grab a wide receiver or a running back here who could potentially put up more points that you might be able to have. Again, I'm not hating on grabbing Stroud in the fourth. I would just hold off on grabbing him a little bit later. Now, in my instance, I'm looking at players that are going to be the best available. James Cook is a great option. Ever since they changed their offensive coordinator, the Buffalo Bills went running back heavy. James Cook was phenomenal. I can grab a player like Trey McBride or Andrews, have a premier tight end. I could even grab Kenneth Walker, Devonta Smith. Now, I may be able to try to grab a second receiver. I'm actually going to end up grabbing James Cook here because I think James Cook as a flex player is going to be phenomenal, and I could possibly use him as trade bait later on in the season if needed. Now I want to grab my wide receiver here. I did see Devonta Smith and Malik Neighbors go. So in this case, I'm actually going to end up grabbing Zay Flowers. Now, Zay Flowers can be drafted a little early. The 5th round might be just a bit of a reach. He doesn't have, I would say, enough targets to be a premier wide receiver 1. He's definitely a wide receiver 2 in this Baltimore Ravens offense. They are definitely a run heavy team. And still there's some growth between him and Lamar Jackson. But I do think that happens. I like Zay Flowers. I was really high on him coming into the NFL. I was hoping he would go to a different team that was a little bit more pass heavy, but it didn't work out that way. And I think this still is a good play for me as my wide receiver 2. Now, got tight end, quarterback, obviously my bench here. I'm not going to go kicker or defense. You guys have watched these plenty enough. I'm actually going to be grabbing another receiver in Terry McLaurin because I think Terry McLaurin, with Johan Dotson now gone, I think him and Jaden Daniels will actually end up being phenomenal this season. I love Jaden Daniels this upcoming season, so I feel really good about grabbing him there. Now I'm going to grab my tight end. I'm very high on Evan Ingram. I have talked about Evan Ingram every chance I can. Him in this Jacksonville offense and Trevor Lawrence, they just go really well together. Yet he's being overlooked every single draft I go into. And that's okay because I'm going to grab him and he's going to end up having a premier season for me, being in that top 5 to 8 range. And I love it every single time because that, I believe, is why I sometimes help, he helps you win those games. Like, he's somebody who just gets overlooked constantly. I would love to get a quarterback here, but I'm going to wait. I don't necessarily need one. Obviously, you see some of these quarterbacks like Murray, who I love. I've been talking him up. I could see why people are going after him. He had a great end of the season. Purdy's obviously fantastic in that offense, but I'm not going to grab him right there. So looking at what I've got as far as options, I got Zach Moss. I've got some injury concerns with DeAndre Hopkins. Jonathan Brooks is a nice one to pick up. Jaylen Warren says he's going to play week 1. I don't know if that's actually going to happen with his hamstring issue. I'm actually going to be grabbing Jackson Smith and Jigba. Again, another receiver that I think has some really high upside because I think he ends up being the wide receiver 2. I think he's going to get a lot more options and targets his way. I think Lockett ends up taking a seat back in this one. I think they could even really push Jackson, in this offense just to kind of really take over and kind of even push DK Metcalf out of this offense. We'll see how things play out, but I think Jackson Smith is going to be fantastic. So quarterback wise, I could go here, grab Tua, grab Caleb Williams, who I do think highly. I'm actually going to end up grabbing Jonathan Brooks here. Again, Jonathan Brooks, I don't mind grabbing him because I can put him on my IR if your league allows it for PUP players, your PUP players, and I can still pick up someone later on. Jonathan Brooks is expected at least a month out, maybe a month and a half, so he can start really coming into the season where it really, really matters. So Jonathan Brooks is definitely somebody I don't mind drafting a little bit later in most of these drafts. Now, I would have loved to have grabbed Jaden Daniels to kind of really stack with Terry McLaurin. That was hoping to happen, but it didn't quite happen. So I definitely start to need to consider grabbing quarterbacks here. Now, I didn't get any of these players that I would have considered: Goff, Jaden Daniels, things like that. So looking at the options I've got Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. Not the most premier quarterbacks. Now, several of these quarterbacks could end up being top 10 quarterbacks easily, even top 5 in some instances. Now, as far as rushing ability, really none of these guys besides Deshaun Watson has some of that rushing ability. So rushing is definitely something you got to consider playing a factor. Like I said, Jaden Daniels, I think, is going to be a nice little steal for a lot of people who draft him this season. Now, looking at this, I end up grabbing Trevor Lawrence, even though Justin Herbert's a lot more talented. Trevor Lawrence, again, has the ability to end up being a top quarterback because of the offense, the way it's built, and I don't mind stacking him with my tight end and Evan Ingram. Now I've got 3 spots left plus my kicker and defense. Now looking at what I've got available, I do see some of the kickers being ranked a little bit higher. I'm not going to go grab kicker. I'm going to try to grab them a little bit later. I'm actually going to handcuff my Jonathan Brooks pick with Chuba Hubbard because Chuba Hubbard obviously will come into this offense as the starter. Miles Sanders is essentially being just kicked out. So Chuba Hubbard is a great opportunity to play and give me a lot of points, at least early on in the season, if I need to play him. Again, not somebody I have to because of the way my running back room is stacked up. I am going to end up grabbing a backup quarterback here, or maybe a backup tight end just to kind of play things out. Now, looking at the backup tight ends, I love Ben Sinnott here. Ben Sinnott, I think, is going to be actually a really good option going forward. I think he's a tight end that you really got to get familiar with that name. I think he's going to end up surprising a lot of people. I've got one more player to pick on my bench, and then obviously my kicker and defense. I feel really good about my receivers and my running backs. So I'm going to get a backup quarterback here in this case. And looking at the quarterback options, for me, I think Baker Mayfield is someone that you got to feel confident going into. Obviously, Stafford would have been a great option too as well. But I think Baker Mayfield has a lot to prove what he did last season. And I think he'll end up doing that because of the way I think he has this connection between Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So I feel really good about Baker Mayfield. Grab my kicker. Again, you want a team that is going to score points and get down the field. So I'll grab Jake Elliott for the Eagles. They're a team that can get down the field. They are going to have chances where they're going to allow field goals. And again, plenty of points. Now grabbing my defense, looking at the defense that I've got here, I'll end up grabbing the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's nothing wrong with the Steelers. Their defense is always phenomenal every single season. And I like what they've done with grabbing Patrick Queen. And then obviously, hopefully a healthy TJ Watt coming into this season. All right, so that is my mock draft for the 5th spot of a 12-team league. Let me know how you guys thought that draft went. If you guys want to critique it, if you guys thought it went really well, maybe you drafted certain players different ways. Or if you like the strategy I went, hit me up in the comments down below. Again, if you guys have any questions for fantasy, any questions for your draft, anything like that, hit me up in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button. Stay tuned for more content. We have some great waiver wire start and sit videos coming out, obviously, when the season starts. And I'll check you guys out next time.